what do they go for? They go for the one that's separated from the herd. And the idea behind cybersecurity nowadays should really actually be is put enough security controls in that they just go, you know what? There's someone down the road that's got it all wide open, I'm just going to go for them. And if you can just make yourself look as unappetizing and unappealing as possible, that's half the battle.
Welcome to the Modern.NET Show, formerly known as the .NET Core Podcast. We are the go-to podcast for all .NET developers worldwide, and I am your host, Jamie GaProgMan Taylor. In this episode, Lianne Potter and Jeff Watkins of the Compromising Positions podcast joined us to talk a little bit about the practical side of cybersecurity. Both Lianne and Jeff are cybersecurity professionals and have a ton of experience in the industry. But I had them talk about cybersecurity from a developer's point of view. What can we do? What do we need to know? And how can we help our colleagues on a daily basis?
I think the other side's true as well. I think companies in general need to encourage a more holistic and shift left and integrated approach to security. I think we talk about that quite a bit, about the idea of this should not be an over the fence, because there's two sides to the coin. On one side saying, oh look, there's the security team, they're the partner of work prevention, they're the ones who are going to stop you. And there's the other side of that coin where nobody's bothered to ever include people from the security in their ways of working and daily practices.
So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and we'll dive into the core of modern.NET. So, Jeff, Lianne, thank you very much for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate anyone who's going to be on the show, and I think that this conversation we're going to have is going to be a little different to what I usually put out on my show, because we'll get to it in a moment. But I feel like the discussion around security, cybersecurity, safety, and all that kind of stuff tends to get pushed past developers straight onto, rightfully or wrongfully, onto the security people, and it seems to just stay there. And I feel like it's important that developers, testers, technologists should be involved in that conversation. But I guess we'll get back to that in a moment. So thank you both very much and welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much. Can't wait.
Awesome. So for a little bit of background, I met both Jeff and Lianne at the Leeds Cybersecurity Conference in 2023. That is a conference put on by our mutual friend Lee, and the goal is just to get people in a room talking about cybersecurity, and I think it went really well. But I think before we do any of that, I was wondering, could you both give the listeners a bit of an intro to yourselves, like a elevator pitch or something?
I was so tempted, Jeff, for us to just do the way we do it on the podcast. So I'm Lianne Potter. I'm a cyber anthropologist and head of security operations for a major retailer.
And I'm Jeff Watkins, CTO for a major tech consultancy. Something. No. I've been in engineering for pretty much all my adult life, really. I started programming when I was 6, which I think makes me one of a dying breed who remembers actually coding on old 8-bit computers. I think there were too many people doing that nowadays, thanks to the education system. So I've been a lifelong technologist, but over the years, I've gained quite a lot of appreciation for cybersecurity as being a really important topic, along with other topics, and I found it fascinating to balance both being a CTO and also running a small cybersecurity function. Nothing anywhere near the scale or importance of what Lianne's doing in her career, but I think it gives you having an interest in cybersecurity gives you a really, really good foundational knowledge of what's actually really important to most organizations nowadays. So that's why I talk a lot about cybersecurity in general, even though it's not really my major career.
And while you're talking about it, you also talk about it with me every Thursday on our podcast, Compromising Positions, Protecting Your Assets, Never Leaving You Exposed, the big emphasis on ass. We are very much collaborators in this because we were speaking I'm an ex-developer myself, and we've been talking for quite a long time about that user journey for people outside of the security team. Like, why are these security controls not working? Why is there so much friction with the business when this should be really important? And if the news stories and scandals that are coming out with cybersecurity incidents at the moment, why isn't it still on everyone's agenda right at the top? Because this just keeps happening and happening with more frequency. So we decided to get together and do talks and podcasts about it. So we're, I think, the only cybersecurity podcast that doesn't interview anyone who works in cybersecurity. So I'm the only official cybersecurity person on the show. And we interview people like software developers, people working in user research, data, and then outside of tech, things like people working in psychology, behavioural science, and other anthropologists as well, to get an outsider's view on why insecure behaviours keep proliferating. I would say to listeners, do Google, if you are searching for us, compromising positions cybersecurity podcast. Do not just Google compromising positions on your work machines. I can't be held responsible for what might come up, but...
Yeah. I mean, there is a rather mediocre film with that name, but yeah, you're probably going to get something a little bit more salacious if you're not careful.
Oh, well, yeah, I remember I was mentioning your podcast to a client of mine, and I was like, yeah, this great podcast called Compromising Positions. You should look it up. And then I realized and went, yeah, you're going to need to put podcast and like security or something at the end of your Google search. I am not going to be held responsible for you getting in trouble with your IT department.
Yeah, very much so. Do you know what that is? It's because me and Jeff have a really serious condition. And it's kind of like our support group, really, this podcast. Our serious condition is silliness Tourette's, and we can't help it. We were just like, this is too good a name not to use. And so our podcast episodes as well are not SEO friendly. It's doing us absolutely no favours, except we have charted in the top 20 recently in the UK for tech podcasts. But yes, our Tourette's silliness of it's not doing us any favours for actually finding our audience or anything like that.
Well, I tell you what, it does drive traffic to our website, though, because looking at our actual keyword hits, people searching for compromising photos do end up on our site. So
they do. They do. That is one of the most common search terms. I guess explaining what is a compromising position might be of some interest to your listeners. And why is it called compromising positions? Well, the title comes up because quite often in the discussion, the discourse around cybersecurity professionals and cybersecurity teams have often said that it's the people in their organisation outside of the security teams that are the compromising position, that are what they sometimes call the weak link, or even stupid in some cases. Now, I absolutely hate that term. I think if you start calling people the weak link in your organisation, you're doing yourself no favours. But also, you have such a wrong approach of how valuable people in your organisations can be to help you on your cybersecurity maturity journey. So I actually think the real compromising position, if you think that individuals in your organisation are the reason why your security controls are failing, it's because the security team are the compromising position. So it's turning it on its head, really, of understanding it's not individuals in an organisation that are out to do harm to your organisation. Actually, the insider threat piece, someone inside your organisation maliciously trying to, exfiltrate data for cost, is extremely rare. And we focus too much on that side of it rather than people just trying to do a job. People just want to get through the day, and it's actually our security controls that are preventing them from doing that because we don't consult with people on how to do it. So the actual compromising position is the security team, in my opinion, but also compromise is literally what it is. What we actually need to do to enable the business to engage with people. We need to come to a compromise between what the business needs to do to be profitable and therefore pay my wages, but also what we need to do to keep safe. So we have to find a middle ground. And so what I aim to do with the podcast with Jeff is to understand other people's perspectives so people can start having those negotiating compromise topics of discussions.
And I think it's important. One of the reasons we have so many people like behavioural scientists and people in marketing and UX on there is actually bringing some of those ideas and skills and frameworks that don't need to go and do another degree in them necessarily, but understanding the core concepts of things like storytelling, bringing people on board, so important in an area that actually is pretty invisible. Security should be unobtrusive, and also security, people don't feel security unless it's obtrusive or it's being breached. It's a secondary user concern. People don't sign on to their banking app and they don't think, I want to log on somewhere today. They know they have another task to do. People working in an organisation have other tasks to do. But that means that people don't necessarily understand it or put enough importance on it until, of course, there's a lack of it. It's like a seatbelt in a car. There was a big push and it was really difficult to get people to wear seatbelts when they're introduced because as long as you don't crash, a seatbelt's just an inconvenience. But of course, we know how many, you can look at the figures of how many road deaths have been prevented by seatbelts and by enhanced road safety measures. Actually, it's hugely important, but people have a bias towards what's in their view now and what's important to them. So having that storytelling, leaning into things like behavioural science, leaning into how you market it properly, I think that's really, really important. And of course, cybersecurity teams, in my opinion, I don't know if Lianne will agree or disagree with me here, but quite often either mixture of people who are technical and understand cybersecurity quite well and managers and not really as diverse. Now, we've been lucky to speak to a couple of people who are actually in or worked in the past in cybersecurity teams who are in other fields, like Ben McEwen, who I think was a behavioural scientist before she worked with in the military and with the cybersecurity team. So I think the enduring message is we need more of that in cybersecurity.
100%. I think just from my background as a dev, as a consultant, I think that the more varied voices we can have in any part of technology, but I think mostly in cybersecurity, the better, right? Because how do I put it? I usually say to juniors and interns when I'm talking about building secure code, I say to them, hey, we have to think like a criminal, right? And the example I always give, and I'm sure that if folks want to do a search on the website for the podcast, they'll see it in the transcripts come up about 500 times, is that if I just want to steal a car, just for the feeling of stealing a car or just to achieve the goal of stealing a car, I don't care what car it is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go stand in a car park and I'm going to watch people come in and go in. I'm going to watch how they are handling their keys and what they're doing with their car after they've left the car, right? And I'm going to pick the easiest car to break into. Now, this metaphor doesn't really work in my experience in cybersecurity, but if you stick with it just for now so that I can make the point, I feel like your thief in that instance is going to look for the easiest car to break into, and if everyone in that car park is operating at a level where, at the very least, there's certain security things are in place, like a lock on the steering wheel, like maybe an immobilizer, maybe an alarm, maybe immobilizers have fallen out of fashion, I don't know. But you're locking the car, you're putting a steering lock on, you've got, an alarm on there, and you're making it very visible. I am locking my car, you can't break in, or it will be harder to break in. Then with that, it will make it more difficult for that thief to steal a car. Now, the problem is, in order to build those defenses, we need people with lots of varied experiences in order so that then those defenses can be built up. Like you were saying there, Jeff, about having people with lots of different varied backgrounds, perhaps not even from a technology background, is probably a great idea. In fact, it would likely be more advantageous to have someone in a cybersecurity place where they are not from a technology background. Maybe they are from a humanistic background, right? And I'm sure that we'll talk about the anthropology side of it in a moment. But like having someone there who is like, I understand people, I understand how people work, like you were saying about the behavioral scientists, the behavioral psychologists, you can then put in place things that make it less likely for someone to break in.
Yeah, and it's always that ability to make it less likely. So I think for a good few years now, we in the cybersecurity industry have kind of made peace with the fact that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and kind of living on the principle of assumed breach, which basically means that you kind of live your day-to-day assuming bad things are already happening in your network. And so what do you do to help spot it? What do you do help to remediate and things like that? And when you think of it like that, you can understand why quite a lot of cybersecurity teams are very het up, highly strung, if that's your constant default position, to be constantly paranoid and stressed out. So when an engineer comes up to us and says, oh, I want to download this unapproved library or this unapproved tool, and then they get their head bitten off. I'd really like to encourage the engineers to kind of take a step back and just understand we are in the cybersecurity team one of the most underfunded, under-resourced, underloved areas of the business at the best of times, and we've had to say no to a lot of things out of self-preservationist needs, because it's easier to say no rather than have oversight on yet another tool, another area of the business when we don't feel supported. However, if you can come to your cybersecurity team with a really strong business case of saying, like, look, I've looked up the risks, and compared to the return on investment of actually utilising this tool, this is a good opportunity for us to go ahead and use it. And I will take ownership of any of the risks associated to it. Because that's one of the biggest kind of struggles we have in cybersecurity is people helping us take ownership of things. And along with being one of the smallest teams, we're also expected to know more about every area of the business in terms of from a technology perspective, as well as nowadays from being actually business minded, commercially minded. So I find one of the struggles I have when I'm talking to new starters coming to the industry is like, where do I focus? It's like, you have to kind of be careful about being too focused in cybersecurity, because you will be expected to know everything there is to know about the cloud, everything there is to know about engineering, infrastructure, and compliance, and all the other things that go along with it. And it's really overwhelming. So there is a definite need, and this, the podcast hopefully addresses that by giving some insight into the different areas of the business. A definite need to share that load of responsibility, because I'll be honest with you, your cybersecurity team doesn't know everything there is to know about cloud. They don't know everything there is to know about engineering, etc. They need you to be a part of this journey so you can tell us what risks might occur from that, because you guys can be the expert in that. When I was training up to work in tech, I could have decided, right, I'm going to be the best, JavaScript, best .NET developer there ever is, and focus right onto that and consider nothing else in my career could be really specialised in that. I don't really get that opportunity in cybersecurity to do that, because I have to be really agile to meet the needs of the business, and it's really tough, and that leads to interesting behaviours.
I think the other side's true as well. I think companies in general need to encourage a more holistic and shift left and integrated approach to security. I think we talk about that quite a bit, about the idea of this should not be an over the fence, because there's two sides to the coin. One side saying, oh look, the security team, they're the Department of Work Prevention, they're the ones who are going to stop you. And there's the other side of that coin where nobody's bothered to ever include people from the security in their ways of working and daily practices. So then the project ends and goes, we're going live next week, you okay with that? And then suddenly everybody's on the hop because nobody's had any sight of that. And I think taking an integrated approach to security and spreading that responsibility and spreading some of that autonomy when it's mature enough, I think is going to be super important for the future of cybersecurity. And also, like, taking it out of the hands of being purely technical as well, sort of leaning further into that point of making security part of the product process. Going, hang on a second, we need to think about on a fundamental level when we build this product or service. Are there actually some ways, thinking about who the persona non grata are, who the people you like, the opposite of a product persona that people will be quite familiar with? Who are the people you don't want, who are probably quite likely to actually try and do something nefarious with your application? Not talking about unsecured ports or things like that. It's more like fundamental misuse, and actually you can get a lot of mileage out of that because people all the time are trying to attack the application itself or attack the people in your organization. You know, the human beings, unfortunately, are increasingly becoming the target of cybersecurity attacks as it gets much more difficult to actually hack systems directly as defensive measures, automated defensive measures get better. So I think there's both sides need to meet, and there needs to be an olive branch from both sides to actually build in safe and sustainable and continuous security in organizations. But that requires a whole bunch of organizational change, which is also why I think it was fascinating to hear from Paula Zizek on one of our recent episodes about how do you actually make organizational change without tears, because that's certainly something I'm not an absolute expert in, and it is one of the biggest things an organization do is changing their ways of working or their structure.
Do you have a WPF application and want to take it to macOS or Linux? Avalonia XPF, a binary-compatible cross-platform fork of WPF, enables WPF apps to run on new platforms with minimal effort and maximum compatibility. With a few tweaks to your project file, your WPF app and all of its dependencies are ready for testing on new platforms. Start your app transformation journey with a 30-day free trial. Head over to avaloniaui.net/themodern.net show to get started today, or press the link in the show notes as it will have the full URL. I 100% agree. I have noticed over the last 10-15 years there's been a big push as part of the DevOps revolution, and this is something that's been going on way longer than the last 10 years. Like, I have the original book on Kaizen, which was written the year I was born. I will leave it as an exercise to the listener to figure out when I was born. But I have the original book on Kaizen and the Toyota production system book, which it was then used to create a whole bunch of other books, including The Goal, which was then picked up by Gene Kim when he created this idea of what does DevOps look like. And there's this big push everything to the left, because and it is genuinely important. For those who may not know what we're meaning here, imagine the software development lifecycle as a continuum of a straight line. Release on the right hand side and initial work on the left. You're pushing left means push all of those responsibilities for security, for design, for releasing and all that kind of stuff as far to the left as possible, because the further it gets away from someone who can make a positive change, the more expensive it is to change it, right? And what I've noticed is there's a book called the Phoenix Project, which is the book that introduced a lot of developers to DevOps. And in that book, there is a security professional, and he talks a lot about push it left, push it left, push it left. Because when they come to release the new, it's a fictional tale about a company that releases software. And they talk about how when it comes to release a new version, they're usually releasing it, then asking him to test it for all of the security things they need to test it for. And he talks about push it left constantly, almost constantly. And there has been a big movement in the last 10, 15 years of saying push it left, but nobody, from my perspective, actually doing the push it left, right? And I know that you said there, Jeff, about it's becoming harder and harder to break into things from a technical point of view, like the software that we all use and stuff like that is getting much better. But like the first step is including tests in your, like, automatable tests in your software that tests for some of those known vulnerabilities, right? And maybe signing up to having someone in your team who signs up for a CVE list, right? That's just a list that, for the folks who are listening who don't know, that's a mailing list where you get told about the newest vulnerabilities in all the different software packages. So then you're immediately finding out as soon as it's released to the public, hey, we're using this piece of software and there is a security vulnerability in it. And guess what? There's already a new version with a fix in there, because by the time the CVE goes public, they've already fixed the problem in an update. So like it feels like, from my perspective, the software side of stuff, like you were saying there, Jeff, it's almost a solved problem that nobody tends to want to talk about or implement the solution. We're like, what the heck?
Well, the Phoenix Project, absolute seminal classic. It's something that whenever I have a new starter, as in a new career person coming in, cybersecurity or not, I always recommend they read that book, because it gives you such an incredible insight into every different area of any kind of organisation. So that business there, from what I recall, is a bit like a quick fit. So. Or should I say, like a Halfords, like an American style Halfords style thing. And yeah, the CISO in that one, by gum. We were very lucky that our very first episode of Compromising Positions, we got to interview one of the authors on there. And we were like, dude, what's with that character? He's awful. And has a pretty much, by the middle of the book, a mental breakdown, goes off grid, and then comes back with a shaven head. But I think the message kind of still stands, is there is ways and means of doing things in terms of getting buy-in from the business, and I think the Phoenix Project itself really encapsulates the wrong way to do things. You need to, in cybersecurity, understand what is really actually the necessity for the business. Human beings are very good at taking risks if they think it's not going to happen. And if they think it's not going to happen, then you're never going to ever get buy-in from people. So you need to put a bit of tangibility into the things you're discussing.
Yeah, 100%. If you can make it real, what is it that... So long-time listeners will know that I trained as a teacher directly out of uni. So I did computer science, went to train as a teacher, and I feel like it's helped me in my career. The other thing I did that I feel really helped me in my career is working in retail, because, the shop floor retail, dealing with people. But the working as a teacher taught me that when you need to impart some knowledge on someone, you need to make it real. You need to give the reason for it to exist. And I feel like this fits with something that you've both said several times. And I'd be interested in your opinions on it. And something you just said there, Lianne, about making it tangible, making it real. Tell me why I need to do this. Not how do I put it? It's not a case of set the rule to be, don't click on any outbound links. It needs to be, don't click on any outbound links because it could be this and it could be that. But don't worry about it if you do, because we can maybe fix it, or we can set up a rule or something, right?
Yeah. I think this goes back to the power of storytelling. And I said that as one of my key takeaways from my career, especially becoming more senior, when you're trying to persuade people. The power of persuasion, quite a lot of it is in the storytelling, because you say don't click on links. Okay. Then you can say why don't click on links as well. Then you can go even further and start to provide all that context. And then it was really interesting to hear from Ray Blake with the Dark Money Files. I believe he was saying, correct me if I'm wrong here, Lianne, who started talking about, he shares stories of the impact of victims of financial crime, the devastating impact. And then you get even more into the hitting the emotions as well. And when you start to put the why, the background context, and the impact and the positive or negative, depending on what you're trying to sell, then because I'm sure in all of our heads, when we're trying to persuade people of stuff, it can be pretty obvious because all of the why exists in our heads, but it doesn't exist in other people's heads. And I think that's been one of my biggest career learnings, is actually you got to take people on the journey. You can't just give people facts and figures and rules.
I think that's exactly the way Ray described it was, I can tell you that for example, by 2025, 10.5 trillion will be lost to hackers. Such a big number that we can't really comprehend. And it's the same with just in general bad news stories. You know, we hear about something awful in the news, but we're hearing about it so much, lots of awful things happening in the world, that we kind of become desensitized to it. And that's only natural. But when you talk about individual stories that has so much pertinence and resonates so much more with people, and it's about finding those micro tales you can tell. And yeah, like you said, Jeff, telling people not to click on things. Well, my whole job is pretty much email based and clicking on things. So either you tell me not to be able to do my, don't do your job, or we're going to have to find some other way of kind of managing this. And I much prefer considering educating people in the right way of what to watch out for beforehand. But I think what's really important these days, and will become increasingly so, I'm going to drop the buzzword here, hold on to your hats, when AI really starts affecting yeah, I've done it and it's going to happen when AI starts really impacting our ability to protect people. Because, for example, we've told people for years what to spot with phishing emails. Now AI is going to ruin that, because they're really good at writing phishing emails now that look a lot more convincing. So I can't tell you to watch out for the Nigerian prince anymore, and I can't tell you to look out for spelling mistakes, because ChatGPT, is really good at grammar. So we're going to have to keep thinking about, well, what's the other line that we need to consider. So remember back what I was saying before, we are in cybersecurity very much aware that it's going to be a when, not if. Therefore, we need to make sure people know what to do when it happens. To me, that's the crucial thing. If someone's sitting on something because they clicked on something and they are terrified that they're going to get into trouble for it, and then they don't report it for hours on end, or maybe at all, and we have to spot it through our monitoring systems, then you've failed. Your cybersecurity culture has failed in that case. It's about people going, oh, clicked on something, let me report it to the cybersecurity team, they will deal with it. And then that's exactly what we need. That, to me, is the more important message.
Yep, and you can't get that without having a psychologically safe workspace, right? A place where someone can actually put their hand in the air and go, I've made a mistake, or, I think I've made a mistake, or can someone please check this? Because, I don't know whether it's a specific thing to my generation. I'm going to speak specifically from a developer standpoint here, but I don't know whether it's something specifically from my generation of developers or not. Like, we tend to be really worried about looking like we don't know what we're talking about. Whereas I'll sit in a meeting and someone will say something. Like if there's acronyms and jargon being thrown around that is not the standard a set of acronyms and jargon that you would find in that conversation, I will literally interrupt the meeting. I'll be like, right, someone needs to tell me what these words mean, because I don't know what they mean, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know what they mean, right? Because I'm going to make an assumption. We all know what happens when you make an assumption. If you don't, go watch an early episode of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where you're told you will look like an ass and the ump will shun you. But like, there's this real fear of not wanting to be seen to not know something. And I feel like that's a symptom of a psychologically unsafe workspace. And if you have a psychologically unsafe workspace, then you're going to have a cybersecurity culture where people feel like they can't report something, right? Or maybe they feel like that if they did, they'd get fired. Whereas actually, what I took from what we've been saying so far is that actually, just let me know. Hey, if you think you did something wrong, if you think you've clicked a link or downloaded something or done something you shouldn't have done, just let me know, because then I can fix it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I totally get the whole reason why you wouldn't, and I think it's beyond the workplace. As human beings, we've all got incredible egos about how people perceive who we are. And that's because it's programmed in, that whole thing about you make micro judgments as soon as you meet someone, and then those judgments are very hard to change. You always want to make a good first impression, and regrettably, the workplace doesn't allow, especially the more hybrid and remote situations that are increasing. Our interactions are all really time boxed. So the first time I could meet someone, it might be to talk about something really awful, like maybe a really bad security control or something like that, or a project's not going well and they need support on something, or highly stressed environments. And if that's your first engagement with someone, it kind of sets the tone for the rest of your working relationship. And again, like the conversations I come into quite often, I don't ever claim to be the smartest person in the room. And you can find yourself thinking, oh, that they've invited me to this meeting because they're expecting an answer. And I don't have one to give because I'm not an expert in this field, but I have to seem like it. And I totally get the onus to want to constantly feel like you're proving yourself, and how that would have an impact on people's ability to put their hands up and say, yeah, I don't know, and therefore I need some support.
Yeah, I think one of the most freeing things you can do in your career is unloosing yourself from the shackles of feeling like you have to be an expert. And I think getting comfortable with uncomfortable conversations is part of that as well. And I think that's unfortunately they don't teach that. They don't teach that in any university that I know of, or any really many courses. I'm sure there are maybe some leadership courses that do, but it's a very tricky one for technologists, because technology is very binary in some ways, but the people behind the technology is definitely not very binary.
100%, and it's shocking to me that there are some things that we don't get taught. That I mean, yes, okay, right. Computer literacy is a big thing, right? Because we're all going to be using computers. Online literacy, incredibly important, because we're all going to be online. Like, there are people alive today who don't know what the world was like before the internet, right? Totally, that's cool, right? But and those are very important things. And there's a big movement to, there was a big movement a few years ago, get kids to learn to code, because they'll need to in their later life. Absolutely. But I think the most important thing, and it always comes back to this, no matter what you're doing, I feel like the conversation always has to come back to whatever you're doing, you need compassion. Empathy, sympathy, and compassion. It's a 1, 2, 3 step process. You can't have compassion without empathy and sympathy, and you can't have sympathy without empathy, right? And I feel like it's always super important to have that, when, even if you're in a positive situation, right? You can still be positively compassionate to someone. But I guess the situation that you were both talking about there, that maybe the first time I meet someone in person, because we're working in a hybrid or a fully remote situation, is that I have to go to their office or go to some place. Maybe it's a third place that we meet, maybe a coffee shop or something, and have that conversation about, there's been a breach and we tracked it back to your computer, can you talk me through it? Or indeed the worst one, which is, there's been a breach, it was you, we're gonna have to let you go. Like, there's never any from my perspective, there's never any feeling of, how do I put this across in the most compassionate way? I totally understand how it happened. But then, like, that's also perhaps a learning experience for not just the person who did it, not just the employee, but for the whole company, right? Because if you've recognized that there is a way that a problem could present itself, a breach, an issue or whatever, then that should really be a learning exercise, right? If I know that, Jamie in accounting, oh look, I'm picking on myself. If Jamie in accounting clicked this link and caused this problem, well, maybe there's some education we can give there, some training we can give there, or maybe there's a better way to catch that, right? Maybe that request went out to a known place that was a known bad spot, but it went through some kind of proxy or through some kind of 2-3 hop process. It still got there, so why did we allow that traffic there? And it being less about, oh no, you've pushed the wrong button, so you have to be fired. More about, oh no, you pushed the wrong button, how can we make this better, right?
Yeah. It's really tough to kind of get people to admit that they've done something wrong. So the best successes I've ever had, though, are from the real life storytelling like that. So one instance I remember at another organisation I was working at, the CTO sent us an email to investigate, and it was a really weird email. Even to this day, I can't quite work out what the scam was. There was definitely a scam in there. It wasn't just a spam email. There was, links that they wanted the CTO to click on, urgency, all the kind of red flags you would see. And we said to the CTO, it's like, this is a really interesting email. Do you mind if we share it with the organization? And so we, in our all hands, we went through this email, and it was, a genuine email, to the CTO. And we sort of said, look, this is what you need to kind of look out for. This is what you need to spot. And people were so interested, going, well, what's the scam here? And I was like, I really don't know what the scam here is. This weird link went to a weird Facebook page that went to another Facebook page. We were following the breadcrumbs and we couldn't work it out, but there was something going on. But people were more interested because it was like, oh, even the CTO is, what would be the implications of someone, a high privileged user has their accounts breached. And then one thing I have a lot of success with is taking part in induction days. Now, when I take part in induction days for new starters, I don't come up and stand up and say, hi, I'm Lianne in the cybersecurity team. This is what you shouldn't do in the organisation, and here is the policy. Because they're going to get the I would say boring security awareness training anyways. But what I do is I tell them about every time I've ever been hacked. And it's so powerful to hear that someone who, lives and breathes cybersecurity all day has also been susceptible to it. So I take them through my sort of, there's 3 key stories I tell them about when I was a student and my emails got hacked, and this hacker just like spammed all my contacts, including my university lecturer, and said that I had lots of raunchy pictures for people to see. I didn't, but it was really embarrassing, and so I had to change all my details there. And then there was another time when I was working at an organisation, and we didn't have a big IT presence, and we all kept the pop-up that says, you must restart your computer, we've got all these vital updates. We just said remind us later for like a week on end, and then one day we turned on the computers and it was all down, completely bricked due to malware. And so we were out of action for a week. And then finally a recent story where I was sat on the bus a couple of days before Christmas, and I got a 2FA ping to say that someone in Scotland, I'm based in Leeds, was trying to buy lots of things through Amazon, and just telling them little stories about, particularly with the MFA one, about how actually that stopped an incident from happening. An incident was happening with me, but because I took those precautions in place, that I was able to prevent it. And that's a much more powerful story than saying to protect our customers' data and business data, which is very lofty, especially when you've just joined an organisation. You don't really know why customer data and business data is important, and turn that sort of messaging around to a more personal message is so incredibly important, because I would rather protect my own personal stuff than the business stuff if I'm an individual user. So it's easier for me to care more about my stuff than it is a massive corporation. But the same security principles apply. The same things you would do in your personal life apply to your work life. So it's just all about really good habits.
If you're enjoying this show, would you mind sharing it with a friend or colleague? Check out Podcatcher for a link to the show notes, which has an embedded player within it and a transcription and all that stuff, and share that link with them. I'd really appreciate it if you could indeed share the show. But if you'd like a few other ways to support it, you could leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. So if you head over to .netcore.show/review, you'll find loads of ways to do that. You could consider buying the show a coffee. The Buy Me a Coffee link is available on each show's show notes page on the website. This is a one-off financial support option. You could become a patron. This is a monthly subscription-based financial support option, and the link to that is included on each episode's show notes page as well. I'd love it if you could share the show with a friend or colleague, or leave a rating or review. The other options are completely up to you, and are not required at all to continue enjoying the show. Anyway, let's get back to it. Yeah, what was it that I heard the other day? Somebody had said something like, locking your house door won't necessarily stop someone from breaking in, but not doing it will make it even easier for them to break in, right? And I feel like That's again, I talk with metaphors and analogies, right? And I feel like that's a pretty good, not perfect, but a pretty good analogy for using well-known, I hate to use the term industry standard, right? Because I know so many companies who, when you report something to them, oh, we use industry standard X, Y, and Z. I'm like, well, clearly you don't, because I just broke into your system, but like using strong passwords, using multi-factor authentication, using one-time time-based passwords. So yes, they raise the barrier to entry for a legitimate user, but they also raise the difficulty for someone who wants to break into a user, like a username password facing system, right? And I feel like, you wouldn't just lock your house using a padlock and a bolt, right? Like on those old gates, you'd slide the bolt across and then put the padlock on. You wouldn't just do that because that's going to be broken into. You're going to hire an expert to give you a relatively good lock on your front door. And I feel like maybe it's an attitude thing. Maybe it's because it's at work, it doesn't really matter. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to be having these thoughts. I have to say that.
Well, if you do enjoy a good metaphor, another way to think about it from the the cyber criminal's perspective, it's a numbers game, and it's about, imagine the Serengeti. So you're a lion. I don't know if I've got the right animal there. It's lion or tiger in Serengeti, and you see a load of animals. What do they go for? They go for the one that's separated from the herd. And the idea behind cybersecurity nowadays should really actually be, if put enough security controls in that they just go, you know what, there's someone down the road that's got it all wide open, I'm just going to go for them. And if you can just make yourself look as unappetizing and unappealing as possible, that's half the battle.
I think, and it is always a trade-off. And it's finding the good trade-offs. So MFA is a great trade-off because it takes you a couple of seconds longer, but the amount of extra security it provides is a very good trade-off, because you can make a system incredibly secure if what you do is you take your system, disconnect all the network cables, seal it in 6 meters of reinforced concrete and drop it at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. I would be reasonably sure that nobody would break into it. But it won't be very useful. It won't be very accessible. And it's like that the CIA triad of cybersecurity. You've got to balance. It's always going to be a fine balance. Because if somebody really wants to get into it, if say you're running a florist's website, and if maybe say the Russian government wants to actually do a state-funded attack on it, they will get in. But for the most of us, we're probably not the key targets. It is about finding that best trade-off, and that will mean procuring the best kind of services that are value for money for you, and the best kind of controls that provide usable security that isn't too much of a trade-off. And that will, if you're working in the NHS, that's going to be a different level of trade-off to if you're working at GCHQ, which is going to be a different trade-off to if you're running a florist's website. So it will differ, but it has to be a conscious effort to think about, well, what are those trade-offs? Think it from a human-centric point of view and from a business risk point of view.
Yeah, I like that. Having the trade-off and accepting that risk, or rather having an acceptable level of risk, all right? If we get hacked today, because, you've both said it's more a case of when, so if it happens today, what is the risk, right? What could actually go wrong? Is it just reputational? Is there customer data that could be released? Is there money that could be stolen? And having that acceptable risk, I think, is and that level. And there's something that there's an app security professional that I know called Tanya Janka, and she talks about getting a sign-off from the decision makers. Now, this is more of a developer thing. I'm not sure. Obviously, I can't speak to your experiences being in the cybersecurity side of it, and hopefully, if you're willing to, and if it's okay to share, I would love to hear it. But like Tanya says that when you present a problem as a developer and you say to the manager, whoever, hey, we need to fix this. If folks remember the Log4j thing from like 2-3 years ago, where it was possible to run arbitrary code via a logging framework, right? We need to fix this. What is the fix? The fix is we update a package and we rerun our tests, then deploy as quickly as possible, assuming that the tests pass. How long is that going to take? maybe 2-3 hours because the fix is already out there. We just need to do all of the releasey bits. And then if that manager or that decision maker turns around and says no, you say, okay, right, I need you to sign this piece of paper that says I've told you what the risks are and I've told you what the fix is, and you personally have decided not to do it. Now, I wouldn't want to work in a company that has that low level of psychological safety where everyone feels like they have to cover their own backs. But like, I feel like when it comes to acceptable risk, there needs to be someone who's willing to say, yes, I will take the responsibility of having this risk, or we as a team, as a company, as a group of individuals will all band together and take the risk of, yes, we have decided that for our florist's e-commerce website, we don't need multi-factor authentication because we've taken the risk of it doesn't matter for our perspective, right? Or maybe it's a website that allows you to log in and just list the books you've read. Well, there's kind of no point in having multi-factor on that from our perspective, because all you're doing is giving us a username, a password, and a list of books, right? The amount of PII there is probably pretty slim. But like, how do you both feel about that, about having like a responsibility sign-off sheet?
I think in some areas of the business it's just absolutely necessary, particularly if you're thinking like very heavily regulated areas of industry and things. You kind of have to. Now, Log4j, now that's, I'm sure every cybersecurity person still shakes when they hear it, but that's the one actual occasion where that was actually an easy sell, because it was so incredibly public. And that one in particular was an easy sell. It's actually all the other stuff that is really hard to kind of sell as why we need to fix that. And I would absolutely love a software engineer to come up to me and say, I want to fix this. Let's get this kind of signed off. But I think it's a necessity at the moment, and it's one of the reasons, I've been very kind of vocal and public about it. It's one of the reasons why I don't see CISO in my in my future career ambitions, because that's a really interesting role where it feels like there is a lot of scapegoating and blame placed on people, and that's why these processes of like getting sign off kind of proliferate. Is you can get into really big trouble if you do something wrong. And the CISO kind of carries a lot of that burden. And it's a bit of it's one of those kind of scary roles. But it'd be interesting, Jeff, because you're a CTO, what about from your perspective?
I think it's a really interesting topic, because I think on the other flip side, when it comes to stuff where we think there is a real clear and present danger, I'd kind of rather people did come to us with you need to sign off on this, because it then makes it really obvious that we believe this is of sufficient importance. And again, I think the storytelling plays into this. You need to understand, if you just walk up to somebody and say, if we don't fix this bug, then bad stuff might happen. When you talk about what Log4j and what it's used in, and it's not just using our software, it's using all the libraries for our software on our estate. And actually, I don't know, what we'll say 80% of Java solutions across the globe. I don't know what the actual figure is, but it was a lot. And then you start to see that scale of it and the actual and show what the actual outcome of this could be, the arbitrary code execution, and then say, well, we need to sign off on this as a risk to the business. I think that's actually kind of helpful, because unfortunately some people still have, I'd say, tunnel vision when it comes to risks, and I think this goes back to a talk that we heard at the Leeds cybersecurity conference about the severity of the severity listed on some of these lists actually isn't necessarily how commensurate with how it's being used in the wild or how easy it is to exploit. In the case of Log4j, I believe it was found in Minecraft in the chat function, because somebody put a string in and went, oh, hang on a second, I managed to hack it, and then it all kind of blew up. So it was incredibly exploitable and incredibly prolific, and it had been used in the wild. So people don't often score stuff, I'd say, in the most helpful way. But when you've got a really convincing argument, and you go, like, we need to sign off on this, I think it's actually a positive thing. Now, I really don't want to I think there should be an element of psychological safety in bringing these to the table. And you don't want to, I always say when you have to invoke the contract, you've kind of lost. But I think in some cases for very important risks, I think it's actually a healthy thing to keep a register of them.
That was such a good talk, wasn't it? What was really interesting about that is, let's just take Log4j out of the mix there, because that was a weird, almost like a little bit of a cybersecurity gift, I'll be honest with you. Just in terms of getting why cybersecurity is important on the radar. Unfortunately, that tends to be the way. A nice good breach tends to do a lot of cybersecurity teams a lot of good rather than bad, because I don't know if you noticed that every time Uber has a breach, there's loads of jobs going in their cybersecurity team the next day. So it's good for business. Keeps us going. But in the talk that we saw, all three of us saw at the conference, it was that weird thing where once you start actually breaking down how relevant this risk is to your organisation, it turned out that if you were to go just specifically by the CVE kind of scores, you'd be probably misplaced, because something that's, industry-wide considered a 9.8, which is like one of the highest you can possibly get, it goes up to 10. By industry standards. But then when you do the kind of understanding of like how relevant is this to the organisation, how exploitable is it in our environment, yada, 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 is there a fix, or all those kind of things that Jeff was talking about just then, it turns out that actually it's not a big deal. But however, you have in your, when we've done a scan, in your organisation, a load of things that on the CV score would be very low scoring, but highly exploitable. And because the way we organise our security work, particularly from an AppSec perspective, we go, we're only going to focus on the criticals, highs, and maybe some mediums. But actually, it's the true mediums and the true lows that they're going to really catch you out if you don't be careful, which is why I always recommend that teams have a cybersecurity spring clean a couple of times a year and actually start thinking about looking at those mediums and lows, and don't be blindsided when you're doing your AppSec by the criticals and highs. Yes, they are important, but if I was a cybersecurity criminal, I would leverage those lower mediums, actually, because I know that you are all looking for the biggest fish that are out there in your application security teams, to fix those highs that have just become really public and had lots of Log4j articles written about them. I'm actually thinking, I'm going to go through a means that you're not even thinking about at the moment. And that talk, I think, was absolutely spellbinding. And I think it was from Precursor, just to give them a shout, Precursor Security. So
we've mentioned it twice now on this, I think, on this, or maybe it's a different one, actually. Scratch that.
We mentioned it a lot because we really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I actually got them to come into my organisation and redo that talk again. That's how much I enjoyed it. So
I think we're all waiting for the Log4net breach there, just so you can feel included.
But Jamie, I think for your listeners, obviously this is might be of interest. So Jeff does we both do together. We do a lot of work around product security, and I don't know, Jeff, if it's worth you talking about your thoughts around product security.
Yeah, so I'm not only CTO, but I spend quite a lot of time as being Chief Product and Technology Officer. And at XDesign, we take clients through that product journey. And product security I think is a much underloved and under-referenced part of security, because both Lianne and I looked it up, and we found in product books there's a mention of security, like one line. And security books doesn't really feature. And then we're thinking, you put Agile into the mix, and there are one or two reasonable books on Agile security. But if you're talking about Agile product delivery and baking security into that, there's almost nothing there. So what we talk about and what we advocate for and what we do workshops, both Lianne and I, but also at my company XDesign, we do workshops, product-centric security workshops, and they're not traditional threat modeling. They're not the kind of thing where people look at network boundaries and firewalls and ports and things like that. It's more looking from the outside in with a variety of techniques, including, as we mentioned earlier, persona non grata. We look at the misuse cases, the abuser stories, which are the dark side to user stories. We look at attack trees. We look at things like what assets do you do some asset mapping, and it's all really non-technical, but it's all looks at the background of your product and starts to think about the countermeasures at the very most fundamental level, like for a banking application, what might people try and do? And then, obviously one of the countermeasures, we'll mention a few times, so I'll keep mentioning, will be, maybe we need to consider multi-factor authentication. Well, I guess nowadays it's mandatory, but the idea, like this process starts to make clear in your head where your threats are, and also where your countermeasures could go before you even start talking about which cloud platform you're going on, which ports you're going to open, or anything like that. And it's a really engaging process. And then, of course, then you can do your more traditional threat modeling processes, whichever flavor, whichever acronym you like to follow. You can do, obviously, the SAST and DAST tooling for scanning, and as well, you can do other technical measures, but actually starting fundamentally, I think it's a really powerful tool, and that's why we like to talk about it. I mean, we're presenting that, I think, as the opening keynote for the International JavaScript Conference in April as well. It's been an interesting topic, but it's one that I think we're only just starting to get some traction in the industry.
Yeah, I feel like it, from my perspective as a dev, I would love to be able to, at the beginning of a like a development cycle and throughout it, be able to actually pause work and go, right, okay, where are we? What are we doing? What's the implications of the stuff that we're putting out there? Because I feel like it's not been explicitly mentioned in this conversation, but I feel like it should be, and that security is a moving target. Right? It's not something that can just be fixed and don't worry about it, it's fixed and done, right? Because we were talking about Log4j for a little bit, and then obviously, Jeff, you were saying we're waiting with bated breath for the Log4net because it will likely happen, right? That's not to say that Log4net has bad code in it, it's just that someone somewhere will find an exploit and it will be published somewhere, and then everyone who's ever used Log4net will then have issues with the different versions of the software that they're using. And I think because I may be wrong. Please do point out if my assumptions here are wrong. Maybe that's the question. Is cybersecurity, app security, platform security? I don't want to say X security because people might think that I'm talking about Twitter, but you know what I mean. The insert name of thing here, security. It's a moving target, right?
I remember many moons ago saying, "Don't worry, you can open an email. There can be no viruses in emails." Email clients got more advanced, and then got to the point where you could open up an email, and that for a while there were vulnerabilities that would infect your PC. This is a long time ago, but it still stands. Any advice that I give today, or we give today, may be outdated within two or 3 days. People, not just 0 days being found or other existing defects, but also, when people update things, they rather unfortunately, inject new vulnerabilities. And also things that were secure many moons ago are no longer secure just because computing's moved on. So absolutely, it's a very movable feast. But I think one thing I can't stress enough is it's probably easier to build in good security controls, good security practices, and all of the scanning and all of the other pieces we've been talking about up front than it is to try and slap them on later when you're on the back foot because there's something bad has happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my question then, as we're coming towards the end of our allotted time together, I guess, what are some of the things that devs, if a developer is listening to this, first of all, go ahead and go subscribe to Compromising Positions. I've been listening since the start, because you guys both announced it at Lead Cybersecurity Festival, and you were saying, hey, the first episode drops in a couple of days, and I was like, right, I got to go subscribe now. So genuine recommendation from me, go subscribe to that, because there'll be things that you learn that you may not really think about as a dev, especially if you're like in the weeds. But like, is there anything that you could both suggest to a developer who's listening to this going, okay, right, let's take security, app security, cybersecurity, platform security, security at work, security in my home life. How do I make that better? Like, what's the one thing that you could suggest that folks can do if they're listening to this?
Ooh, one thing.
I know there'll be millions, but like, what's the bare minimum, I suppose?
I would say if you are struggling to get by on an either side, either you're working in a Scrum team and those security tickets just stay on that backlog, or whatever, or that you're coming to your security team too late in the process, and maybe they're causing you blockers because you've said, hey, I need help with this, and they haven't got the capacity anymore and your project gets delayed. Is talk to your security team. Talk to them about how you would like them to treat you. So for example, when I ask, get a pen test done for you, how do you want that report? Do you want it in just a PDF, or do you want me to just throw some Jira tickets on there? How do you want that information communicated? How would you like us, do you want us to say, oh, actually, we think this stuff's important, this is where we want you to focus, or do you want the autonomy to make those decisions yourself? Likewise, show some curiosity in what we do. As soon as anyone shows any curiosity into cybersecurity, I latch onto them with both my hands and my toes, and I say, "Yeah, let me tell you everything there is to know about what I know about cybersecurity, just so that I can get some help." It's a two-way street. It's going to take a collective to even get anywhere close to this horrific numbers game, because you've got to think that the cybersecurity criminals, they have totally different motivations to us. They are really well funded. They make millions doing what they do. It's actually a much more lucrative career to be a cybersecurity criminal than it is to be a cybersecurity enforcer. And so we really need all the help we can get, and it starts with a conversation.
I think for mine, it'd be show an interest and learn about it. Really, it's everybody's responsibility for safety, really. I think ISC2 are still doing their 1 million cybersecurity certs initiative, where you can go and get a free basic cybersecurity cert training and the actual cert itself. Go and take an interest, learn about it, up your game a little bit. Because I genuinely believe this, that if you up your game in your professional life by learning more about cybersecurity, you'll also learn more about it to actually help you keep safe in your own personal online interactions. I think the more you know about it, the more you understand about this area, which is just getting bigger and bigger every year. It's showing no signs of slowing. By 2030, the amount of cybercrime, the funds lost to it, will be more than the GDP of the USA, which is the largest economy in the world. So just take an interest, because I think it's essential. Cybersecurity could be an existential threat if we don't all pull together and learn about it.
I like it. Okay. I think there's a lot to be said, and I think that you both have. If I'm going to do the horrid thing of reducing everything you've both said over the last hour down to like a single sentence, but I don't mean that to sound horrible when I say it, but it feels like it's all about people, right? It's about the people side of it. Yes, we're all dealing with technology, but at the end of the day, the three of us are all people. We're all discussing this, right? And if we were working together in a team to do something, we're people trying to achieve a goal, right? And I feel like that human connection, being able to talk to someone and say, hey, what can I do better? Is there something I can do better? Can I go do some training? Can I, like you said, Lianne, how do I produce this data for you? Like you said, Jeff, maybe if I go do this training, I'll understand it a little bit more. It all makes perfect sense. And it loops all the way back around to compromising positions, right?
And you get to use your closing quote for the talk there, Lianne.
Do you want me to? So my closing quote, I do this quite a lot, is when you follow the cables, you must remember that behind each cable is a person, a hacker, and a person trying to protect that. And we should never lose sight of the human element. Or such something.
Nice. I like it. So how can folks get in touch then? Is it just head over to the website for the podcast, and like if someone's listening in and going, Lianne and Jeff, I want to ask them a question. I've got a burning question. Is it go to the website and there's a contact form, or are you okay with people finding you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, we do have a contact form. You're very welcome to reach on there, but I think the best for both of Jeff and I is definitely LinkedIn. We're pretty much glued to LinkedIn, so that is the fastest way to get hold of us, for sure. And it would really mean the world to us. We have interviewed quite a few devs, so there's more devs coming on our show. Really interesting ones. So the last episode that we had a dev on was a chap who was very security minded, actually, and he did an amazing project with Aberdeen's outdoor lighting, the street lights, and it was about protecting those from IoT attacks and how he went about that. And it's a really interesting conversation. So I would say it's more of a tech podcast than a cybersecurity podcast, and anyone who can get anything out of it. It's not really aimed at just a cybersecurity audience. It's aimed at anyone who has an interest in tech and how to make that tech better.
And I think if you want to talk about things like product-centric security, product-centric threat modeling, do reach out to us. We can either provide some resources, or we can organise workshops.
Sounds good. I'll get some links and put them all in the show notes, so nobody has to dive over their dashboards whilst they're listening and make a note. Please drive safely. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure talking to you both today. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having us. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Modern.net Show with me, Jamie Taylor. I'd like to thank this episode's guests, Lianne Potter and Jeff Watkins, for graciously sharing their time, expertise and knowledge. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at the podcast's website at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that. Reach out via our contact page at .netcore.show/contact, or join our Discord server at .netcore.show/discord, all of which are linked in the show notes. But above all, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope that I'll see you again next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks.